The Blazers have had a sneakily decent start to this NBA season. Even though they're 13th in the West and probably don't have serious playoff aspirations, they're far from being in contention for the worst team in basketball like they were last year. They've already won 7 games, and those 7 wins include a late game thriller against the 7-seeded Clippers, back-to-back wins against the Timberwolves, and most recently a 6-point win over the 3-seeded Rockets. And a big factor in them being so much more competitive to start this year has been the play of rookie Donovan Clingan, who already looks like one of the very best rim protectors in the league. Clingan is a literal giant in every sense of the word. Standing 7'2", there are only 3 players in the NBA who are officially taller. He pairs that height with an impressive 7'7" wingspan, and that length gives him an incredible radius as a shot blocker. Take this play for example. As McDaniels drives, Gobert seals Clingan on the other side of the rim, and when Jaden takes off to finish from the right, Clingan is actually on the left side of the restricted area, yet still is able to connect with the ball at its apex. Here's another one. Instead of sealing him off, you're going to see Gobert flash into a passing angle, and instead of sitting under the rim, Clingan is actually standing on the edge of the restricted area, yet again still gets a hand on the ball. The uniqueness of Clingan's physique isn't limited to height and length though. We've seen taller and longer players, such as the guy who was selected 2 picks after him, Zach Edey. Edey stands at 7'4" with a 7'11" wingspan, giving him a total of a 6-inch advantage over Clingan in sheer length. Yet, if you look at the standing reach of both of these guys, it's actually the exact same at 9 feet 7 inches. A lot of tall guys have a similar build, with a long neck and wide shoulders, but Clingan's quite the opposite, having really high and narrow shoulders, which makes him feel a lot bigger on the court than he actually is. He's one of those guys who will often block shots around the rim while barely even leaving the floor, and that's if he even needs to jump, because he's a huge deterrent just by virtue of being a literal tower. I mentioned that there were 3 players officially listed as being taller. Wemby is one of them, weighing in at 235 pounds, and Bol is another, weighing in at 220 pounds. Clingan, at 280 pounds, has a very filled out, bulky frame, so not only is he a tower, he's a brick wall. Just look at him against Şengün in the post. He's completely towering over him while being damn near impossible to move, and when Şengün thinks he has an angle to finish, there's that long arm. Later in that same game, Şengün tried to take Clingan from out in space, and when his drive gets cut off, he attempts to drop the shoulder, using contact to create separation, only for Clingan to absorb that bump, hold his ground, and make it a tough finish. When you account for all of the physical tools, from the height and length to the shoulder placement and strength, when he's on the floor for Portland, it's like offenses are trying to score with a wall in between them and the rim. And that alone would give him such a high floor as a paint protector. What takes him to another level is that he's also mastered all of the techniques required to block shots like the best of the best. It starts with his positioning. He's great at recognizing threats and rotating over to meet them early, where all he has to do is go vertical. It's clear that he processes the game very quickly. As soon as it looks like Reed's about to free up on a drive, he visibly reacts like there's an exclamation point above his head and immediately puts himself in position to send away a layup. But just because he's quick to get in position doesn't mean he's quick to leave his feet. Here he gets to the paint before Zion's able to take off vertically, and he actually waits for Zion to take off before leaving the floor himself. That's a testament to his timing as a shot blocker, which is nothing short of impeccable, and what I would highlight as the biggest disparity between him and a guy like Edey. And that combination of elite timing and positioning is what allows him to cover multiple players in the paint at once. Here he's matched up with Edey, and he has to rotate over to cover J-Huff in the dunker spot. Nobody drops to tag Edey, so it's also his job to turn back and shut that off as well. And if that wasn't enough to sell you on how good of a shot blocker he is, what if I told you that he's also ridiculously good at targeting the ball with his hands? When attackers are coming towards him, you'll often see him use his right arm to sort of shadow the ball up until its release, allowing him to make immediate contact with shot attempts. This is a great example where he's not only moving that arm, but rotating his body to make sure he has a good angle to attack the ball. Then when AJ Mitchell thinks he has a finger roll, it barely even leaves his hands. When he's tracking the ball like this, it almost feels like watching a predator stalk its prey. As Beal maneuvers the paint, notice how Clingan continues to shadow all of his movements while remaining right under the basket. Then when it gets moved to a cutting Booker, he sends a layup right into the crowd. Now, it's only been 17 games, but Clingan is currently averaging over 4.5 blocks every 75 possessions, first in the NBA. For reference on how absurd that is, Wemby, who many would consider the best shot blocker of the century, has averaged 4.3 since entering the NBA a year ago. And that type of presence at the rim has an immense impact on how players approach scoring. Just to avoid him on this one, look at the finishing angle Dyson Daniels has to get to. How many times have you seen an air ball on a layup? However, I do want to be clear in saying that per possession averages aren't quite indicative of Clingan's value as a defender just yet, and are more of a reflection of what he can be as a full-time starter in years to come. As things currently stand, he's only playing 17 minutes a game and has only played more than 30 once. One factor is Portland's stacked rotation at the 5, having to find minutes for DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams, and on occasion Duop Reith. But a bigger issue has been the rate at which Clingan fouls. If we go back to those per possession numbers, he's averaging 6.2 fouls per 75. That's basically telling us that if he played consistent starter minutes, he'd be consistently fouling out. Of course, that doesn't account for the fact that he'd probably be less aggressive in bigger minutes, but maybe that would then mean he's blocking less shots, and to me, it's a double-edged sword that can simply be chalked up to the fact that he's still a rookie with lots of room for improvement. I will say that I think he's already getting better with each game, and we're seeing more and more of these vertical contests after putting himself in the right position. Like I said, he's great at positioning himself, tracking the ball, and overall has great movement patterns when it comes to patrolling the paint. So even when he isn't blocking shots, as long as he stands tall without fouling, there are very few better at altering attempts down low. On the season, he's defended 69 shots within 6 feet of the basket, and on those attempts, players have shot about 17% worse than their typical average, tied for 3rd in the NBA among players with at least 50 attempts defended. As a result, many players choose not to test him at all. Here's one where he rotates over and gets in position early to help on a drive, to which Ant stops short for a much tougher mid-range jumper. This is what most people refer to as rim deterrence. Monk attacks the paint, runs into Clingan, and makes a business decision to not attempt a shot. The offense resets, Lyles attacks the paint, and with Clingan under the basket, he decides to stop short for a floater. The ability to deter shots with his positioning and size has already made him one of the league's best drop bigs. The whole idea behind drop coverage is to keep the pick and roll a 2-on-2 instead of bringing in extra help, which means that the big has to be able to handle 2-on-1 situations. And as I mentioned earlier, the way Clingan tracks the ball, patrols the paint, and uses his body allows him to cover multiple players at once. On this one, that quick processing speed really stands out. Rob's gonna reject the screen, and Clingan immediately gets in position to turn him away. Then he gets back in front of Gobert to force a really awkward shot. When he's in the middle of the floor, it's really difficult to get anywhere near the rim. Even Shea can't really find an angle to attack off a screen as Clingan shadows the ball, and so what ends up happening is that the initial pick and roll often doesn't create any advantage. Everyone's able to stay home on shooters because Clingan's taking away both the ball and the roll, then the offense has to reset after using more than half the shot clock. The counter to this would either be strong off the dribble shooting or an efficient in-between game, and it's true that some world-class attackers can give him trouble in this deep drop. But when it's a guy like Tyus Jones, the defense is more than happy making him into a scorer, at times even encouraging it, because they know they'll win the math game against the heavy diet of longer twos. And because Clingan's got that massive frame, it's not like these are always open shots. He can sit back and still get a hand up on floaters or pull up jumpers, at times even stepping up near the level against higher level shooters like Buddy Hield, knowing that they aren't looking to turn the corner. With that said though, it's best to keep Clingan as close to the paint as possible, and that's because his one major weakness as a defender is his mobility, specifically in the hips. He just isn't that quick left to right or changing directions, so not only can he sometimes struggle containing explosive attackers, if he commits to the ball, he typically has a hard time recovering to protect the basket. As a result, he tends to stay way back in deep drop when defending pick and roll, and against certain teams or players that can really limit his impact. In general, versatility isn't much of a strong suit for Clingan. In drop, he's incredible. Around the rim, he's incredible. But when offenses find a way to get him defending in space or trying to cover lots of ground, it's pretty clear how big of a weakness this is, and I wonder how that would look in a playoff setting. Here's a play against Golden State where his man sets a flare screen and it's his job to close out on a shooter. He just simply isn't anywhere near quick enough to get a hand up. Even when playing man-to-man defense though, the limitations with his mobility show up. Not only are most bigs quick enough to get around him with one move, God forbid he gets switched onto a legitimate perimeter creator and has to hold his own on an island. Because he's not quick enough to stick with these guys out on the three-point line, he often has to leave a cushion of space to protect the paint. And one thing I'd say he really needs to work on is not leaving his feet on up fakes, as that just makes it even easier for attackers to get around him. I do want to be clear though, thanks to that massive stature, when he does sag off the ball like this, it's not as if offensive players can easily get to jumpers over the top of him. Then when they do decide to try attacking that space on a drive, that's where that world-class rim protection comes in handy. No, he isn't a guy you want switching across the board or having to cover multiple spots, but I would make the argument that in recent games he's shown to be much more effective in space. Against the Wolves, he spent a lot of time defending Julius Randle, and he more than held his own against the bulldozing creator. An even bigger test though came against OKC's small ball, where they run nothing but wings who can hit outside shots, and he did pretty well on closeouts, in space, and of course around the basket. I do wonder how much his mobility can develop, because when I watch him defend, the closest comparison I can make is probably a younger Rudy Gobert. He's a bit bulkier and less disciplined, but if you remember, Gobert used to be one of the most awkward perimeter defenders in the league, routinely getting caught off balance or just looking silly. Over the years, he built up his core strength, worked on his agility, and has now turned into a guy who can execute different coverages or switch when needed, regardless of what the national media might tell you. If Clingan can become even competent in space to go along with absolutely remarkable paint protection, we might just be talking about a future defensive player of the year contender. There's a lot to work on, but even as a rookie, he's been really valuable on that end of the floor. Don't look now, but Portland has an above average team defense ahead of playoff contenders like the Bucks, Kings, Nuggets, and the Suns. If he can cut down on the fouling and improve his mobility, I think it's safe to say that when we watch Donovan Clingan, we're looking at the NBA's next great rim protector. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of Clingan. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.